Grayson, thank you so much for being here with me today. I can't wait to start the conversation, and there's a lot of value that you can add to students. But before we start, can you make a brief introduction about yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure and an honor. A lot of great people that I respect have come on your show. So, happy to hop on and chat. But yeah, my name is Grayson Harding. Presently, I am a supply chain manager with Walgreens, or known as like Boots in the UK, if you're from over in that quarter. But I've also been involved in collegiate esports for the past 5 years. First as a player, then as a league operator and tournament organizer, and then most recently as a coordinator and coach at Michigan State University. I've also been a student athlete in the past as well, and that's kind of informed my own experiences as both an esports player, coach, operator. So yeah, I'm super happy to chat and kind of dig into player marketing, player branding.
Yes, I mean the key of this talk is based on your experience. Give a more clear picture students into how they can market themselves, talk to esports directors, and what they have to have into accountability when basically reaching out or like maybe taking care of their social media to make sure that everything is aligned. So like when a student reaches out to you, what's like the first thing that you look at in a student?
Yeah. First impressions mean a lot is what I would say, first of all. And there is kind of a meme or a trope among coaches and that work in collegiate esports is what's the overall level of professionalism that the student is approaching the director with? There's been probably countless instances of the first time a player will reach out to a coach or director, they're asking how much scholarship money they're going to get. They're typing in all lowercase letters. The grammar could have used another look through. That could be a great player with great academic ambition and great, talent with the game. But first impressions matter it's the first time that they're seeing you and interacting with you. So I would say, if you're going to, that's probably the first thing I notice when I'm a coach is, how much thought did they put into this message? How short-sighted are they? If they're asking about scholarship and, we haven't even made any kind of informal greeting yet. That doesn't signal to me that the student is kind of serious about like a long-term seeing themselves graduate and walk across the stage with a diploma, right?
Yeah. And not in person, but online, when you have those initial recruiting calls online, do you make them have a camera? Or what is your impression if they don't use a camera?
I mean, personally, I'll reserve judgment if a student doesn't have a camera, for whatever reason, if they prefer not to. I'd like to see a camera if I can, just because, again, as a coach, we're gauging if the student would be a good fit on the team, and also the student it's kind of a two-way thing, right? The student needs to be gauging if culturally they'd be a good fit. And, a lot of that is built off of the back of establishing a good rapport and a good relationship. So yeah, I'd say cameras on is always good etiquette. Yeah.
We also make them, remind them like, have a camera, good lighting. This is, this is your future in education. It's not just a random call. So as professional as they can. And when recruiting a student, like, what's your balance between the game rank or the competitive experience and the soft skills that they have? Like, what's like in your mind when you're evaluating that? What's more important, or how much is does game rank go over soft skills or soft skills?
Yeah, it's tough to say what's more important, but what I will say is both are very important. Both are maybe perhaps it might change for each coach, right? But I'd say for me, students need to be thinking about these things as like co-equal, right? Like you can't dismiss the soft skills, right? Like it doesn't really matter how talented you are. Like if someone has a massive ego, if they can't take criticism, and if that like the fact that they can't take criticism becomes apparent like early on in the recruiting process, like an ego will kill a team way faster than any kind of skill differential, right? Between the players. So, when I always think when I'm talking with players and talking to their parents that, we're recruiting a player for 4 years. If a team is, and it can't always be this way if you're a coach, but ideally, if you're managing a program, the upperclassmen are the ones that are going to be kind of carrying the weight of the team, both from a leadership perspective, but also from an in-game perspective. So as far as skill differentials and whatnot, I always think, does this player have the soft skills and the coachability that if they get plugged into the right system over 4 years, they're going to be able to grow and develop and mature? Or are they, very talented early on, but they're not going to be coachable. They're not going to be a good fit with the team. Because I think when you're a coach and you're used to, you think in maybe a longer time horizon than maybe a lot of players initially do, because they had a lot more experience developing a cohort or developing a class of talent. That's what I would say. You really can't ignore the soft skills, and they're really important in both in your time on an esports team, but also your time in a classroom, your time beyond the classroom. Just very important skills.
It's a very important point you mentioned. Like you're not recruiting for a split or for a specific, month period. It's just 4 years. So there's many things that you have to evaluate. Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned ego. When they're in the program, like, do you work the ego side with students, or is it something that is expected as a thing to like have certain boundaries? How do you manage ego from 18-year-olds to 21-year-olds?
It would probably depend on the individual personality, right?
Yeah.
Really, I can only speak from our perspective and our recruiting perspective at Michigan State when I was coaching there. But there's been several players that I know that were interested in Michigan State, but we're not confident that the culture fit was quite there. And, for us, that is the most important thing over short-term results, right? You might have a really good split if you bring in, the right talent, but the damage it could cause to the culture, might last longer than that individual was in the program, if that makes sense. So, I can't speak for other coaches and how they prioritize it. But for us, and, coaches kind of have to look at things from a long-term perspective, because you're not only representing yourself or, a team, if, you were in the tier 2 space or transitioning from the tier 2 space or tier 1 space even. You're representing a unit that has been around for over 100 years, right? That has had thousands of people come through its door. That's a pillar in the local or national community. So, I'd say definitely it's worth gaining some perspective about why coaches kind of value these things beyond, what it's going to do for the team, right? So you're representing a large institution often. So,
and how do you evaluate the culture fit? What are like the 2 or 3 things that you're like, he's not, or yes, she is?
Yeah. I would say it's never going to be a science, and it's kind of difficult to drill it down to like a list of things, but it's often the sum of a lot of interactions, right? That can make both sides feel that the culture fit is there. So I'll say that in regards to having a lot of repeated interactions, I think one thing I'd like to see in collegiate esports as it as it matures over time, is the recruiting cycle to kind of move further back, right? So when I was a student athlete in high school and in college, I remember the first time I interfaced with coaching staff was when I was a sophomore in high school. I had gotten a letter in the mail that went to my high school, and from lists of schools that were able to find my data online for me as an athlete, and then from there, the ball was in my court to schedule a meeting, to reach back out to confirm interest, to express interest that I wanted to tour. Versus in collegiate esports, a lot of times, a lot of programs are kind of recruiting from semester to semester, or like the pipeline is maybe a lot further closer to graduation. And I think maybe one of the downsides for that is that it's difficult to establish that like longer term rapport that can give peace of mind for both parties that culture fit is there. But also, I mean, it isn't always, you can't always do this, in collegiate athletics, but if you're able to get on tour or get a tour on campus, I always recommend prioritizing that, because it's one thing to see pictures online and, even discussions with the coach online. It's another thing if you're actually there walking around campus, envisioning yourself on campus, drinking the coffee, eating in the dining hall, that kind of thing. They're all like very important for actually envisioning your success long-term at a place. And if I'm a coach and I see a student that wants those things, that's a positive signal to me that they're thinking beyond how are we going to do in CRL my first 2 semesters, right? Or, how are we going to do in CVAL? Because academics in that aspect of it always kind of come first. So whenever I see a student prioritizing engaging with those things, that's a positive message to me that they could be a good fit for the culture that we're building at Michigan State or wherever, right?
Yeah, I mean, probably many esports directors or coaches do that, but like two directors that I've talked to and that mentioned it, that they do recruiting from like 2 years in advance is Boise State, Doc Haskell, and Clerky in Maryville, and like they, like 2 years and stuff. So like that's hopefully that's the new the new, what's the word, like that's what's supposed to be, hopefully, because there's some universities like 1 month in advance, and maybe some international students have to do like the admissions, visa, everything. So sometimes it's a bit,
and it's not my place to, necessarily like, I know every institution's in a different place as far as the resources they have, as far as, like those kinds of things. But that being said, I would like to see more of a transition towards more of a longer term pipeline. But I realized I didn't even answer your question. As far as how I can gauge culture fit, a lot of times too, it's, how does the student view the game? How do they view themselves as, like I mentioned, like fitting in with, within academics and envisioning themselves long term. Those are good like proxies or indicators that the student is mature and thinking about things kind of in the right way. But also, how do they interact with the team? Those are important things as well, right? And students can get really postured and maybe like media trained when they're talking with coaches and stuff like that. But how do they actually interact with players? That sometimes you can start to see some of like ego come through or stuff like that whenever they're interacting with players. And fortunately with stuff like Discord, you don't necessarily need to get them on campus, even though you'd really prefer, stress that again where possible, to get like in-person human interaction. But sometimes you can gauge some of that stuff over a Discord call as well, or like if they're playing friendlies or like laddering if they can with a team. But I wanted to circle back on that because I realized I never directly answered.
No. And you also mentioned academics, like especially at Michigan State, like the admissions deadline is way sooner, like more in advance than most universities, and also the barrier of entry in academics in terms of GPA and like what other stuff you have to have in order to be accepted, because like the acceptance rate is way lower than most universities. So sometimes you may have the best player, but like if they don't fit the culture, academics and all that, you know. So
yeah. I always say like lead with academics, lead with do some research on the school before you talk to the coach. Do they actually have an academic program that you're interested in? And when you're interfacing with the coach, kind of lead with that. Like here's information about me. I've been playing this game for let's say I've been playing Valorant for 2 years. I'm immortal. I'm really interested in pursuing a career or getting a degree in chemistry, and I saw that XY, you have a very good program, and I looked online. Like seeing all those things for me as a coach is like, okay, this student is serious, and they've done their research for themselves. Because once you get into college and stuff, like nobody's holding your hand anymore as far as like to do that stuff and to advocate for yourself and advocate for your future, right? So those are all like, academics has to come first. You have to get into the school before you can play for the school, right? So if students understand that, then a lot of students don't, when they reach out, and I think it'd be good if players understood that, I guess.
Any other mistake that players do when they reach out to you, like messaging or like where they reach out or how often they reach? I don't know, like what are mistakes that they can avoid?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned it before, but I'll like consolidate it. Don't ask about scholarship in the first meeting.
Okay.
Pay attention to grammar, and avoid an AI generated writing or like a response. Okay. It can be good for screening grammar and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, but you want your own authenticity to come through. Let me think here. As far as grammar, don't type in like all lowercase letters. Don't use things like LOL or other abbreviations like that. Because again, you're making a first impression, and maybe if the coach over time begins to use that language and signals like that level of casualness, perhaps you can. But I would advise against it personally. Up until even well into your first semester, it's best to think of things like a tryout, like that you're still earning your spot on the team, right? So, I'd say be mindful of your overall presentation and your message, but also mindful of what your broader digital footprint has to offer. If a player messages me, I'm gonna look them up. I'm gonna look them up on Twitter. I'm gonna look them up on Google, and we want to make sure that a player is a good long-term fit. And so like, how are they, posturing and presenting themselves online, right? Those are things that coaches are going to be looking at, so definitely clean up your social media if if you're interested in getting a degree or playing for a team. Because people will be looking at that stuff.
If a player is inactive versus an active player on social media, does that make a difference?
It could, mainly just because I think right now there isn't a consolidated place for coaches to really find data on players. The winner is still out there, I guess, as far as like, I'll back up. When I was in cross country and track and field, there is a website called athletic.net that was kind of like the de facto winner when it came to the data aggregator for track and field and cross country results. Every race that I ran or and competed in was on that website, so it was very easy for coaches to find a profile with my name, and I didn't even need to like edit it or anything like that, right? And that's often how coaches would find and reach out to me, right? It's a little bit different at esports, and probably there's a number of awesome like paid solutions out there that you can look at and take advantage of, and people that can advocate for you. But I also think like if you have a Twitter profile, right, that you're posting gameplay on, that you have your stats on, I mean, ultimately social media can be a place for you to show your resume and display that data, so to speak. But you gotta make sure that it's positive. You're putting out a positive image for yourself, that you're properly advocating for yourself on that platform.
Mm-hmm. And what do you look at in terms like their esports CV? Okay, what are things that you require from them? VODs, their tracker, pictures. Like, what are things that you require from them before having a first call with them or a first encounter?
Yeah. Oftentimes, if a player's if a player reaches out to me, I'm going to go look for VODs myself. Even if they honestly, it's good. It's probably good if you provide VODs as well, just so that it's easier for me to find out who you are. Because coaches get a lot of, coaches will oftentimes get a lot of people that will reach out to them, and so you kind of have to screen a lot of messages sometimes. But if I had like a wish list or something like that, it would be, if they're reaching out, like what their GPA is, what their test scores are, if applicable. I know if you're reaching out early or advocating early for yourself, you might not have some of those like standardized test scores yet. Major that you're looking for, undecided is also fine. At least, I don't look down or think less of any players that have an undecided major. I was kind of undecided when I was going into school, but it's still good to put on there that you're undecided. Peak rank. I also like to see, and this is becoming more common, in the U.S., but I like to see players that have experience competing on a team, competing on a high school team, for a couple of different reasons, but a team in general too, right? Is this person like a solo queue or a ranked warrior, or do they have experience actually working in a structured team environment, right? Because when you're competing for a team, you're not. It's not the same thing as loading up ranked, right? So a lot of high school programs are developing across the country. I would say if you are interested in getting a degree and competing for a team, you should look at competing for your high school team, right? If anything, because it's going to give you the experience of working on a team where you might have a lot of people that are different than you, and you have to communicate in game through those differences. And so I would say as a coach, I try to eye test through a VOD to see what is this player's game sense and those types of things. But we're just presenting all that information neatly in a CV would be a useful strategy too.
Yeah, if an international student, for example, doesn't have much of a LAN experience and competed basically online, would that be or you wouldn't mind? Because in NA, it's a lot of like in person practice competition as well. So like, is that a deciding factor?
Not necessarily, right? I mean, I know like what's available for players is going to be kind of different depending on where they are in the world. Like I know from my understanding, the high school varsity esports is more developed than it is in other parts of the world, right? So if an international student's reaching out, like I'm not gonna I wouldn't say necessarily like I could take that into consideration as a coach, but the player should. It still doesn't change the fact that it's valuable to have experience working on a team, right? So I'd say look for those experiences so that you can point to them as a coach, when you're talking with coaches that, my high school doesn't have a structured team, but I've been proactive about seeking out these opportunities and learning how to IGL on this team or this team. And, we competed in, this circuit and this circuit, and this is what I learned. And those are things that a coach would like to hear, is like to try to assess or get an indicator if this student can work well on a team, right? So I wouldn't say necessarily puts them back, but I think it does make it harder because you have to be a bit more proactive than just going to the esports lab after school, right, and competing in that kind of proximity, in that kind of fashion.
Yeah. If you could resume in like top 2 traits that a student has to have to be, a potential recruit, what would it be?
Top 2, huh?
Academics?
Yeah. Well, sure. If academics is a trait, then yeah. but I'll list that as like a
Okay.
trait 0, because I think that, seriousness towards academics should precede all of what
Yeah.
you do, and that should be apparent in your conversations with esports staff. So it's kind of like at least for for our team, it's a make or break, and I hope that's the case for a lot of programs out there. And that should be that commitment to academics should be apparent through your conversations with these directors. That I will say that as well. Like that should be apparent that they're as serious about your education as you are. But as far as like traits, I think I really like to see players that have a demonstrated history of being resilient and determined. So that's probably like the first thing I would say. And like I'll speak about things from like a Smash perspective. There's a very Smash is one of those games where like the grassroots scene is like very vibrant, and there's a lot of opportunities kind of wherever across the world to compete in like local grassroots tournaments and stuff. There's also online tournaments. If I see players that have a history of competing in those online tournaments, and honestly, like if they're like an average player, but they really are putting in a lot of the work, I see that as a valuable thing, right? I mean, because again, when we're recruiting for a 4-year time frame, right? So, yeah, resilience is something, and dedication over a long time horizon is something that I see absolutely as like a positive trait, very positive trait. The second thing I would look for is I don't know if this is really intrinsic drive is always a good thing, right? And it's kind of hard to measure that sometimes, but sometimes it's really easy to tell when you're meeting with a student that they have a clear why for what they're doing. That they're very motivated and driven to compete, to go to school. And those are absolutely like very positive things that coaches are going to, be able to determine, right, when you're on the recruiting process. And again, like if the recruiting pipeline started in your sophomore year, which is more in common traditional athletics, it's way easier to kind of see those things come out. Both of those things come out over time, right? When you're starting as a sophomore, you won't even be able to apply until after you've taken your ACTs or SATs in your junior year, right? So I think in traditional athletics, it's easier to see that a student has an intrinsic drive and the determination, because it becomes apparent throughout the recruiting process and their own, how they prioritize their relationship and stuff like that. So, but, when I see those things in collegiate esports, very important, two very important traits, I'd say.
Are references from coaches, teachers essential when evaluating a recruit? Like, do coaches actually reach out to them?
So,
did you? Yeah.
No, yeah. In my experience as a coach I've coached through three different academic years. So, not an expert by any means, but coaching, I have a lot to learn myself. But players haven't had references when I have, they haven't done that. But I will say, now that you bring it up, when I was a student athlete, and when I was, taking tours of campuses and meeting coaches and stuff like that, I had a coaching reference as well that I got from my high school coach. And so if I think if you have those things from teachers, those are very good things to include as well. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think it adds professionalism for sure, and it's a good way, to know actually how the student is. So yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and I would absolutely take advantage if I was a coach and someone had a reference on there. I would definitely call up the teacher, call up the coach, right, to learn more about, like I've only known this player for maybe like 10 minutes after they Discord message me, or maybe after 1 30-minute meeting, and I might be able to piece out a little bit of who this person is. But oftentimes these coaches and teachers have known the student for years. So those are absolutely like, I want to take advantage of those resources if I have them.
Amazing. Grayson, to wrap this up, I want to ask you, where do you see collegiate esports in the future? 3 years.
Oh man, 3 years.
Or where do you want to see it?
it's yeah, I mean, a lot's changed over the past 5 years. I think, and I left my crystal ball. I left my crystal ball over, in Lansing when I was coaching. But I would say what I would like to see is a lot more development at the K through 12 level of. I know you're asking about collegiate esports, but a lot of the success and longevity of collegiate esports is built off of the success and growth of K through 12, right? So yes, that's a really tough question. Where do I see it in 3 years? I would like to see. Well, yeah, I'll loop back to the things I said earlier in this conversation, and I'd like to see coaches take a longer, like push back the recruiting timeline earlier on. I'd like to see more development at the high school level. There's a lot of really great stuff happening there that I think is going to set up the future generation of collegiate athletes well. That I'll say that for now. It's kind of tough to project where collegiate should, quote unquote, be. But I think traditional athletics serves a good analog as far as how things might eventually go, as far as consolidation, or just not even necessarily consolidation around leagues, although that probably will happen or could happen, but consolidation around standards, as far as like requiring academic good standing for a league, right? Or requiring full-time eligibility. So right now the standards are starting to kind of coalesce, and organizations like Voice are really good at advocating for those types of things. But it hasn't trickled down among all programs across all leagues. And so I think an elevation of standards is probably going to happen in the next, say, like 5 years.
Amazing. Grayson,